Week 2 of a series on finances. Last week we learned that our money is not our money. It's God's money. We just manage it. And this week we're going to talk a little bit more about money in this last second of the series. And when I think about how to approach money from a biblical standpoint, by the way, the term for this that you won't hear in the world, it's kind of a church term. It's called stewardship. And anytime that you hear a preacher start talking about stewardship, there's oftentimes a building campaign right behind it. And so some of you are already going, okay, wonder where he's going in here, and I'm wondering, I got to make sure that I forget my checkbook next week. And so I want you to put you at ease. We're not talking about stewardship in terms of you giving. We're talking about stewardship in terms of understanding of God's perspective on money. And the best place that I thought we should go is the book of Proverbs. And let me explain to you why the book of Proverbs is where we go. Solomon wrote the book of Proverbs, and in those Proverbs, of course, many say he was the wisest man who ever lived. And in those Proverbs, he makes statements that are of truth. I mean, he makes statements that are truthful and wise. But you need to understand that the book of Proverbs is not a book of promises. And if you start reading the book of Proverbs as a book of promises, you're going to find yourself extremely disappointed because the things that he states there are not promises that you can hold on to, but they're promises in this regard, that generally speaking, this is a wise thing to do. For example, there's a part where it says, if you train up a child the way he should go, what does the rest of that verse say? He will not depart from it, or he'll return. And sometimes I've met wonderful parents who've trained their children in the ways of the Lord and have done all that they needed to do to raise their child in godly living and understanding of who Jesus is. And that child, for one reason or another, has just hung a serious left. And so the Proverbs isn't a promise, but it says, generally speaking, if that's the case, that's a truth that we can hold on to, going, we've done all that we could to train our child in the right way, and we just have to believe that somehow that the Holy Spirit, through the love of Jesus, will bring that child back. I mean, look at Franklin Graham, for example. Billy Graham was one of the greatest evangelists of all time, definitely in our lifetime, still alive at 98 years old. And Franklin, when he was a teenager, just was a hellion. He was just causing all kinds of trouble. And you think, how can Billy Graham and Ruth, two of the most godly people that ever lived, that loved Jesus with all of their heart, have a child that just lives in such a capacity? And eventually he comes back, and now, of course, he's running Samaritan's Purse and has created this amazing ministry and is continuing this ministry that his father and his mother started. That wasn't a promise. It's a truth. We can't claim those things. So I say that to say there's certain things that the Proverbs speak about money. And so I just kind of swung around on my computer and I just typed in money and Proverbs and I just saw what came up. And what I found were just literally hundreds of hits. And so then I had to sit back and think, okay, how do I categorize all of these things? And one of the things that I realized as I was reading and categorizing all of these, one of the things that struck me very fast, you'll find it to be the case here in the next few minutes, is I found that some of the things that Solomon told me in how I should approach finances was very different than what was natural. Let me tell you what I mean by that. One of the greatest basketball players who ever lived, and I remember the day that he became a Phoenix Sun. Jerry Colangelo walked him into the new U.S. Air Arena at the time, and they walked down in, and they just opened it, and they called a guy, you might have heard of his name, I don't know, you have to really follow sports to know the name Charles Barkley. And so he walks in, and he turns on all the lights, and you can just kind of hear, thum, 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 thum. And they go to center court, and he said, Charles, this room was built for you, and we need a championship banner hanging up there. Of course, that didn't happen. Came close in 90, I want to say 3 maybe, 4. So one of the greatest basketball players who ever lived is also known as having the worst golf swing ever in the world. I have a video. I want you to enjoy. This is for real. He's not making this up, guys. That is the worst golf swing that you will ever see, except for mine. That is the worst golf swing. I was an avid tennis player, and I know I look like a professional athlete, so I just wanted to put that out there right now for you to kind of get a baseline. And I played a lot of tennis and enjoyed tennis a lot. And I was that guy that typically, generally speaking, I had a better stroke than I had game. I mean, I looked and appeared as someone who was much better than he was. And a proof of that, the boys' team, my senior year, the boys' team played the girls' team, and all the boys won except for me. It hurt, and I appreciate your sympathy and the laughter. And so it's something that I'm still trying to get over here 10 years later. Well, here I am as a tennis player for years with a swing, with a serve that could only get so good. I'll tell you the short version. Finally, I got this lesson, and this coach at Arrowhead Country Club right down the road comes out and he says, "I'm going to fix this thing once and for all." I'm like, "Good luck." And he said, "I want you to stand at the line, and I won't go into all the details." He says, "But this is the one thing I want you to do different." And for those of you who play tennis, this probably makes sense to you already. He says, "When you come up and hit the ball," he says, "I want you to stare up there at the ball after it's gone, and I want your head to stay up." And I'm like, that is the most ridiculous thing in the world. And he goes, "Would you just do it once?" I look around, no one's watching because I know it's going to look foolish. And I get up there and I serve the ball and I keep looking, and it is a beautiful serve. And I went, "Thank you, Jesus." And he says, "I want you to keep doing that." I said, "But it looks so weird." And he took his phone out and he says, "Watch this." And he videoed me and he goes, and he showed me, he goes, "How does that look?" And I go, "It looks so much better." He goes, "I know, and it looks better, and it sounds better, and it's going to work better." And sure enough, my serve exponentially got better on that one day. And here's my point. For Charles Barkley, that swing looked natural and normal. And here we are laughing at this swing that the whole world has, by the way. It's not a secret. And I thought that doing something right with my serve felt so wrong. And I felt like people were watching, like, that's so weird looking. Until I watch it and I realize it's not weird at all. Here's my point. The very things that feel natural to you and me in terms of the way we approach finances often feels not natural and right. In fact, at times it just feels wrong and ridiculous. But according to Solomon, our tennis coach, he says, "I want you to do three things," and it's in your notes. If you're taking notes, at the very top, there's three things I want you to keep in mind. We need to first have understanding. We need to then have, now you are literally laughing at me. First, courage, but before courage, trust, and before trust, understanding. So the first thing we need is understanding. I mean, if no one explains it to us, and if we don't have a general understanding, and no one has taught us, how many of us were literally taught how to handle our finances? Not many. And so you have to have understanding, and then once you have an understanding, just like in my analogy of the swing, I had to trust my coach. And I had to say, "You know way better than I do, and so I'm going to trust you." And the third thing I need to do with this coach is I need to have courage to do that. And those are the three things that God says. And it was about 20 years ago. We were at Palmcroft Church back in the day. I was a youth pastor, so we had one single income as a youth pastor. And I don't know what I was making back then, maybe $200,000, I don't know, or 20 maybe, I can't remember. So we weren't making a lot of money, and Judy was a stay-at-home mama, and we were driving old cars, and we were paying cash, and we were doing what we could. However, there was one day that I looked, and someone noticed that the minivan that we were driving, the tires were horrible. They were bald, and they said, that's not safe. And I went home, and I said, hey, hon, we need to buy some tires. And she goes, we can't right now. And I'm like, oh, there's no money in the checking account? She goes, no. And to our credit, we didn't use credit cards, but we had no money. And I thought to myself, I am jeopardizing my family, putting them in a vehicle where the tires are half bald, because I haven't budgeted my money well enough to buy the things that our family needs, and I was wasting my money on the things that my family wanted. And so I called our friend, and in fact, Billy and I, our mutual friend, your neighbor, actually, just around the corner, and I saw their son, named Jeremy, at Betty's memorial yesterday. It was great to connect, and I said, make sure that you tell your parents that I'm using them in a wonderful illustration tomorrow morning, because I went to Wally and Julie's house, and I said, I know that you have budgeted, and I know that you've helped others. Will you help us? And they said, under one condition. We've helped so many couples. Everyone's ignored our advice. Would you promise to do what we say? And we said, absolutely. And they came to our house, and they helped us with the Larry Burkett, the Crown Ministry approach to finances, and we had our envelopes, and we were ready to go. And before you knew it, anytime something came up, we had money for it. And I always said, if a youth pastor at a youth pastor's income by himself can do this, anybody can do it. But we couldn't do it without understanding, without trust in them, and then courage for ourselves to do it. And so with that in mind is the longest intro that God ever created. I want you to keep these things in mind. Number one, the first thing I want you to know is if you have to choose from being wise versus rich, ditch rich. Money can't buy everything, especially wisdom. Proverbs chapter 15:16 says this, better to have little with the fear of the Lord than to have great treasure and inner turmoil. It's better to have nothing and a conscience that is clear than to have great riches and inner turmoil. Without wisdom, the Proverbs say their ways are dark and they love darkness. Proverbs 2. They enjoy running after evil. They refuse to do what's right. They behave in devious ways. They have disregard for covenants and agreements. And in fact, he says at one point, the Proverb says, this is what I really want you to do. I want you to cry out for wisdom. And there isn't a day in my life that by the end of the day, I have asked God to provide wisdom with a situation where I'm old enough to know that depending on how I treat this moment, this person, this situation, this expense, this dilemma, I know in my heart that without wisdom, there is a worse than 50-50 chance that I am going to create even a bigger mess in my life. Because when I handle finances from what feels right instead of what is right, I make a bigger mess of things than I ever thought I could. So will you. When you and I neglect stopping and understanding things like this, that when we have a choice between choosing wisdom and being rich, that is being wise and doing the right thing and doing what's not just ethical but right and good, when we choose what is right versus what we perceive as rich, That's what feels right, and that's what is right. But it doesn't feel right at the time. By the way, so often in the Proverbs, I need to clear this up. The word rich isn't for the person that has lots of money. It's the person who is greedy with their money. That should make a change in the way that you read the Scriptures. Because when you and I read the word rich, it is easy to immediately go, oh, okay, that's not for me. So I just ruined that for a lot of you, and for that I apologize. When you and I read the word rich, we need to understand that it is not the person with lots of money. What is the definition of lots of money? We talked about this last week. Some of us have DirecTV and cell phones and car, and some of you have the audacity to have a house. Do you realize how rich we are in the terms of the world? But it's not for the rich, those that have lots of money. It's those who are greedy with their money. I don't have time for this story, but I have made other bad decisions today, so I'm going to keep on making just one more is all I have to make. There was a man by the name of Jack. He was at Palmcroft. Barry, you'll know exactly who I'm talking about as I talk about this story. You knew Jack. So did I. He just passed about 2 years ago. Jack was a tough character. He was a concrete guy. And he was rough. He was gruff. There was nothing polished about Jack. He looked angry. He looked mad. He wasn't, but he just had this tough, his skin was like leather of being in the sun, Arizona sun for 60 years doing concrete work. He always said, I just do good work. He says, I can guarantee you against theft and fire, that stuff will always be there. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. And one day, he was bringing donuts to the church, to the staff. He was very generous. And one day I said, you know what, Jack? I think that's awesome that you bring these donuts and you'll bring this cake and you'll take us pastors to lunch and you just don't think a thing of it. And he pulled out his wallet and he says, I'm always prepared to help someone. I said, that's great, Jack. And I left, and about 2-3 days later, it was just when cell phones were coming out, and I got a phone call. I was at the state office on 24th Street in Cactus, which is now Arizona Christian University. And I got this phone call, and he goes, in his gruff way, he goes, Randy, this is Jack. And I'm like, hey, Jack, how are you? He goes, never mind how I'm doing. Where are you? And I go, 24th and Cactus. He goes, I'm on my way. And I go, yeah, Jack. Okay. So about 20 minutes later, he says, I'm in the lobby. Where are you? I'm in the parking lot. Where are you? And I go, I said to everyone, I got to head out. I got a meeting. I don't know what's going on. I'll be right back. I go out, and I go up to the window and go, hey, Jack. He goes, get in. I'm like, all right, Jack. So I get around, and I get in this old Ford pickup truck, and I sit down, and what's up? And he says, here. And I'm like, what's that? He says, $50. I said, why, Jack? He says, and this is what he told me. It's 20 years ago. He says, I always have a $50 bill in my wallet. Actually, it was 100 in his wallet. And that 100 was always prepared to give to someone in need. And he says, I promise you, in his gruff way, I'd keep doing that, but my throat's sore. He would get 100, and then he would hand that 100 to somebody else. And he says it was just a matter of time that somehow God would give him another 100, and he would put it into this day in my wallet. I always have a $100 bill, and it's not mine. It's not yours either, by the way, so if you have any thoughts. And one of the things that I realized from this old, gruff, concrete guy who didn't have much, bought his house in Central Phoenix for like $27,000, still living in the same place, driving an older car, didn't care. It's not about stuff. It was about people. Jack chose wisdom, and he ditched rich. Number two, Work like it's all up to you, and trust like it's all up to God. Work like it's all up to you, and trust like it's all up to God. Don't believe me? Proverbs 6 says, take a lesson from the ants, you lazy bones. By the way, this is not the King James. Learn from their ways and become wise. Though they have no prince or governor or ruler to make them work, they labor hard summers, they gather their food in the winter. Proverbs 21, a hard worker has plenty of food. Someone once said, a wise man should have money in his head, but not in his heart. I love that. A wise man should have money in his head, but not in his heart. Some of you need to cross-stitch that and hang that right in your living room. That is something for all of us to keep in mind. I love hearing of ways for people that have found ways to make money and to serve others at the same time. I've done weddings on the side back in, not so much anymore, a little busier these days, but back in the day I would do a lot of weddings, and it was something I enjoyed doing, and I was ministering to people, and I said it was 100% was for people in the kingdom, and it was 100% to help our kids get through college. It was the same thing. Till someone just came up and said, all your kids are going for free, I felt like I had to do that. I had money in my mind, and I tried real hard to not keep it in my heart. Let me just tell you from personal experience that once money gets into our hearts, it is harder to get the money out of our hearts than to protect our hearts from it initially. When money is in our hearts, it takes up all the space and it leaves no room for God. There's a reason why Jesus says you can't love both at the same time. And when you and I have the impression that it's in our hearts but no one can see it or knows it, we're wrong. We're dead wrong. And when Solomon says, work hard, there's plenty of places, and we'll be there in a minute, but be free and be generous. That's point number 2. Point number 3. Greed never goes unpunished, ever. Greed never goes unpunished. Proverbs chapter 1, such is the fate of all who are greedy for money. It robs them of life. It makes us jealous. It makes us dishonest. It makes us shallow in our relationships. It lacks focus. It gives us a dissatisfaction in our lives. And when we have this inner love for more money, it sucks us dry from life. And the American way of thinking, we talked about this last week, is I need more money. The biblical way is it's not our money, it's God's money. We're just managing it. And when someone becomes consumed with money, and I'm not talking about money in the brain and trying to figure out how to work it and how to do this and just upfront and honest and hardworking. And I don't even care if someone charges too much money for a product. If it's on the table and it's a decision that someone can make, that's honest. I don't care. But it's the dishonesty that bothers Jesus. And it's the dishonesty and it's the love of it and the living in our hearts that Solomon speaks so often in the Proverbs. So greed never goes unpunished. Ever. Number 4, caring for the less unfortunate is not an option. Caring for the less fortunate is not an option. Proverbs 28 says, whoever gives to the poor will lack nothing, but those who close their eyes to poverty will be cursed. Richie, where are you? There's a little girl next to my friend Richie. We've eaten at a high-end restaurant a couple times the last month, haven't we, Richie? Denny's. And so we've gotten Grand Slam. Don't judge. And there is a little girl next to Richie. It's one of his kiddos, and this is Izzy. I want everyone on 3 to say hi, Izzy. 1, 2, 3. And I want you to know, if we had more time, Izzy, I would have you come up here, but it's okay that I tell your story for a second? This cute little Izzy and her friends, now her sister Emma, and John and Claire, who also are part, in fact, I met one of those girls last week in the lobby, that she came up and introduced herself to me. Those 4 girls, and those 3 girls and 1 boy, they did something. You can sit down now, sweetheart. Thank you. They started a lemonade stand a couple weeks ago up in the club, and they raised over $400. And so when you ask them, in fact, I had Izzy tell the story to Andy and Taylor and I think Fred before the service, and I said, ask her what they did with the money. And so those 3 said, what'd you do with the money? And she said what? Nothing. You didn't keep 1 nickel, did you? But who did you give it to? Hurricane relief for the Red Cross. Every single... Every penny. In fact, I loved her approach because as people gave her $1, she says, you don't really want the change back, do you? And they went, I guess not. Glad I didn't give her 20. Over $400. At the end of the service, my friend Izzy, and Richie, will you help her do this too? Will you help her? My friend Sandy had 500 of these bags delivered to us this past week. The deacons, who I love, by the way, we have the best deacon group ever, they thought it would be a good idea, and we all agreed, that each family should take one of these bags home, maybe 2. If you talk to Izzy, she'll give you 5. It's just how she rolls. And we're going to each take one of these bags, and right now this is empty, but it's not going to be empty for long because I'm asking all of us to take one of these bags. And Rich is going to be back there with her, and some of our ushers are going to be passing these out as well. And I want you to take 1 or 2 of those bags back, and I want you to go in, and here's the trick. I know the deal. You're going to open up the pantry, and you have a choice to make. You're going to look in there and go, what do I not like? And the first thing that's going to go is green beans, because no one likes them in the can, Mom. Just face it. And you're going to put things in there, and this is what I'm going to ask for us to do, is I want some of you are going to do something really crazy and go to Walmart or Safeway or to Fry's, and you're going to put that in there, and you're going to fill that up, and there's a list in your program, and you can take that with you, and I want you to fill that up. And some of you are going to do 2 or 3 bags. Some of you can't afford to do much at all. Maybe you can just put 1 can in there. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Does it matter? Answer that yes or no. No, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. And so I want you to come back, not next week with that bag. I want you to come back in 2 weeks, and Sandy had arranged for a truck, Foothills Caring Corps, great group of people. I've been aware of them for 15 years. They're very popular, very big in Cave Creek where I came from. Now they have one up here in New River. And I want all of us to take at least 1 of those bags back, and I want you to fill it, and we're going to give that away because it is our responsibility to care for those that are less fortunate. Number 5, spoiling our kids is like poisoning our kids. I want to repeat that. Spoiling our kids is like spoiling our kids. You poison your kid by giving them too much. One of the reasons why we're doing this series now is long before Christmas, and most of you have not started your Christmas shopping. Some of you that are OCD, you're another story for another preaching sermon on another day. But I'm here to tell you that for most of us, we have not done that yet. And one of the things, and here's one of the practical points, is I think you should have a budget. And if you don't, you're poisoning your kiddos. And one of the things that I realized as a pastor with very little money is that the cars that our kids had to drive, particularly I think of our oldest Tatum, that old Suzuki that she just loved, but it was a beast, let's be honest. And we couldn't afford anymore. And I feel bad for the families that can afford to give their kiddos really nice cars, because what feels natural, remember we're talking about what's natural and what's right? Sometimes the natural thing is to give too much, and the right thing to do is not give too much. And so the way I like to look at it is God blessed me with little money. That was supposed to be a joke at that point. And some of you have been blessed by God with little money. And so when your kid says, I need a car, you go, sweetheart, this is the best I can do, if anything. And they just become grateful and thankful. And how many times have we seen parents give their kiddos a really nice car and they trash it and it comes back and it's just a mess? Poison our kids by spoiling our kids. I don't think I have to talk much more on that. Number 6, last point. Lots of money can't help you at the end. In fact, it can only hurt you. Proverbs chapter 11 says this, riches won't help on the day of judgment, but living right can save you from death. Matthew 19, interesting passage. Some of you are coming with us to the Holy Land, and I'm going to show you one of these doors in a minute on the screen, but you're going to see it with your own eyes. Matthew 19 says, again I tell you, Jesus says, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And have you ever read that and you think, what is the significance of a camel through a needle? That doesn't make any sense. And so we just assume, okay, it's just something small and a camel. But that's not what it means. And what I've learned to find is that there is a door, and Jim, I'm going to have you put that picture up there. You see there's 2 doors in that archway. The big door is one that they use very rarely, but the smaller door is, in fact, when I take you, those of you that are coming with us in May and June, that when we go to Bethlehem to see where Jesus was supposedly born, the door is really low, and lots of them are. You'll find yourself, if you're 6 foot taller or like me, you're going to find yourself having a hard time going through the doors. That door, Jesus is looking at that door and he's saying it is easier for a camel to go through the small door of a big door than for a greedy person to get to heaven. And that made sense to people. In fact, typically that camel would have lots of goods. And so the analogy here is the only way that camel could go through is you got to get rid of all of the stuff. Because it's easier for that camel to squeeze, and you just want to say, okay, suck in there, buddy. To squeeze through that eye than someone greedy to get to heaven. Why is it that Jesus spends so much time and effort and energy talking about money? Because there's only one thing that represents all of the other stuff in the world that replaces God, and that is money. And it all becomes idols. Because there's only room for one thing in your heart and in my heart. And God says, we can go through the eye, but we got to drop all the junk. And just quit being so greedy. And so you wonder why I recognize these 4 students, these children. So these moms and dads, they get it. Richie, have you ever been more proud ever in your whole... Yeah. Never. So this message is for me and you. It's not just for you. I never preach just for you. And at the end of the day, when you think about where we are in our lot, on our own, if we let our natural ways take over, we're going to make a mess of our lives because of money. Let's not do what's natural. Let's do what's right. Let's not do what's natural. Let's do what's right. And just like Julie and Wally helped Judy and I 20 years ago, helped get us on a budget and envelope system, and get us in a place where I could finally buy tires when tires were needed, and brakes when brakes were needed, and gifts to others when gifts needed to be given. It's because Wally and Julie spent a lot of time with us helping us understand. A lot of it was unnatural, and we knew it. And we changed over years. And God rewarded us, not necessarily by zeros, but by peace and the ability to give, because there's no better feeling. Come January, there's a couple in Anthem who have a lot of experience with Financial Peace University. And Financial Peace University, FPU, is a 10, 11-week program that I am urging our families to go through. I hope we do not have enough room over in our office to handle all the people who are ready to take a 10-week course in an evening, I don't know which night yet, to go through together, whether you're a single or a couple, and to go through and help get an understanding from Dave Ramsey in this wonderful course. It'll take 10 weeks, and I guarantee it will make a difference in your life if you've never done it, that nothing ever else will make a difference like, ever. And there was no Dave Ramsey when I was around. There was, but it wasn't very popular. There was no FPU. And so we did what was very similar, but today it's much better and it's cleaner. It's more applicable. It's better thought through. The videos are more entertaining. They can't make it any easier for you and me. And I want you to take that communication card and I want you to write FPU, Financial Peace University. Give us your name. And then come January, Janine will drop you a note. Or you can text us at that 800 number, a 480 number that you have in the bulletin that we sometimes put up, and just text the word money, and that puts you on a list and gives you the ability to sign up in January. You don't have to commit now. It's just our way of saying, as it comes up, we'll remind you as it comes up. It is the most freeing thing, and I'm just wanting everyone to consider it and be a part of it. If you're in a place where you've never been taught, and you spend and view money from a natural perspective versus in a way that is biblical and true and right, we just can't make it any easier, and I wish you'd sign up. I didn't want this to be heavy, and I hope it wasn't. This has been a heavy week in a lot of ways, and yesterday was a heavy day, as much as we wanted, and I think we did celebrate Betty's life. Yesterday was a heavy day, and I feel heavy, and so I'm trying my best to keep this positive, and I hope this was positive. The last thing I want to do, thank you. The last thing I want to do is put more guilt, and I hope it's just something that as you look at these notes through the week and you go, you know what, this is good stuff. This is from Solomon, not Randy, and this is stuff that came from God, and this is stuff that if I apply, it's going to make a difference in my life. And if you feel that way, view those notes and check that out and see if it does. Thanks for being a part of Arizona Hills. I don't know if you noticed, but there's something pretty special going on here. And do you guys feel what I feel in my heart? There's a positive vibe. There are new faces. There are great things happening. And if we can just start taking some of these principles that God's given us, for example, with money, there's just no telling where this place is going. So glad to be a part of it, and I'm so glad that you're a part of it. Well, let me pray for you. God, thank you for just a day where we can just stop and think about something so practical as finances. But at the same time, God, it's hard. Because it takes understanding, and it takes trust, and it takes courage. And any one of those three, if they're not involved in the process, we're just sunk. So give us an understanding. Let us trust you in the Scriptures. Let us have courage to work out those details and to treat our finances like you tell us, because it's just easier. Thank you for that. Even now, God, as people leave, they're trusting us with their gifts. They're trusting us with their tithes. Thank you in advance for every penny. Thank you for the Izzies of this congregation and this world who think outside of themselves. God, let us all just have a little bit more Izzy in our lives and be men and women who are just more generous and free with the things that we call our stuff. Thank you for that. In Jesus' name, amen.